So good evening. I prepared a little presentation. I wanted to talk about that I've discovered is somewhat of a connection between the foundations of the Green movement and what later became sort of a green economics, and how that transition happened. We're going to start with a man named Sir Arthur Tinsley. In 1913, he founded the British Ecological Society, which was a time period where eugenics was popular. The American movement was the biggest, but it came from Britain. The Huxleys, I think Thomas Huxley was the grandfather of eugenics, and that was it was not a dirty word at the time. People believed that you need to strengthen the gene pool by eliminating the weaker. At the same time period, you had the Sierra Club starting to surface, and they were trying to get involved in building dams in San Francisco, things like that. That was the sort of earliest incarnation you're going to see of the green movement. With these two things simultaneously emerging, the BES and the Sierra Club. The BES was kind of a vehicle of British imperial rule. Sir Arthur Tinsley was an interesting character. Craig Isherwood from the CEC in Australia, that's a LaRouche organization, he did a report about Tinsley saying that he was not an objective scientist. He was a product of Britain's elite Trinity College in Cambridge. He was a Fabian socialist, a devout eugenicist, and he was also the protege of a man named Bertrand Russell, who LaRouche knows him better than I do. He would tell you that he was the most evil man of the 20th century, who once advocated to nuclearly annihilate Russia before they could get the bomb, because that was the best path to world peace, I guess. Maybe, if we just annihilate everyone, then we'll be eternally peaceful, right? So Tinsley's primary idea was that the environment sort of existed in an equilibrium state where you have sort of a stasis of these systems that are sort of feeding into each other in a series of feedback loops, and it's all a closed system, of course. The universe of a closed system is entropic. There's no way to increase or refine or develop your resources. You just have what you have, and it's sort of, everything's like a clock that's been wound up and is winding down, and eventually will stop, and you'll have, evenly dispersed, motionless matter, I guess. And I suppose that's the ideal state for the oligarchy. They, change is bad, and motionlessness is good, I suppose. But this whole worldview is incredibly flawed. You can see evidence everywhere you look. Life is clearly developing towards higher complexity and not winding down. That's why we have cities and language. You could also look at the records of fossil records. They'll show you a good example is cyanobacteria, which is kind of like a blue-green algae. 2.4 billion years ago, it started to have its own revolution where it was using photosynthesis to heat up the CO2 and the certain gases in the atmosphere, and it produced oxygen. And it was so successful at this, actually, that you had a collapse of all these other species that were based on these other gases, and you had the what's it called here? It was the greatest extinction event that we know of. But that was actually followed by what's called the Cambrian explosion, which is a huge evolutionary leap where many new species were formed, and they all had greater ability to metabolize energy in their environment. They were bigger. They could, move day and night, not just when the sun was out, things like that. Quite a big difference, actually, in their abilities. They had lungs, they're breathing air, things like this. They're coming onto the land. So this kind of shows you that life is going in a certain direction. It's not just random, right? And you don't have. It's not really a system of stasis, right? It's not just equilibrium and balance and staying the same. It's changing, it's evolving, it does that on its own. That's how life works. That's how the universe works. But these guys are pushing a reductionist philosophy that sort of frames the natural world as a closed, fixed system, which first works best when changed least. It has very little potential for change, but this doesn't match with the world we, have measured from our experience. So, the idea is that any changes that we impose through our activity are detrimental to the environment, have a negative effect, and that we're not really capable of having a positive effect on the environment or our surroundings. It's a zero-sum ideology, so it's literally that the idea that you can take everything you see, reduce it to an equation of mathematics, balance it out on two sides of the equation, and that's it. There's no way to really change the parameters on either side, and you've kind of got, it's balanced. So if you change anything, it throws off the balance, and it all goes out of whack, and you have a catastrophe, I suppose. So Tainsley called this the great universal law of equilibrium. And they wanted to apply this to everything, including mechanical systems, where you can show some examples of closed systems where these theories could work. But the reality is that most things you look at, such as the world or the universe or the human mind, they're not closed systems. They're constantly changing, and they're subject to self-conscious creative change. They wanted one of the things that came out of this was the Gaia theory. That's applying this idea to the world as and considering it as an organism. So this is the cybernetics of the 60s. So if everything can be reduced to equations, including the human mind, then that means that computers can replace all of those things, including the human mind. And of course, that would mean that that's the best way to ensure stability, right? And you've got a centuries-old decaying empire that has a great vested interest in stability and status quo and making sure that things don't change, right? So you can sort of see the parallel here. You guys hear me okay? Mm-hmm. What? No. So, yeah, it just doesn't make sense, though. We would have gone extinct if there was no change inherent in our nature. So you have the stage set for the computer utopianists of California in the 80s. They sort of believed that computers could free us from the scourge of leadership and big ideas that sort of transcend the current reality. They thought that, power structures and centralization were the enemy, and that you can be free of these things, free to pursue your own pleasures and avoid pain, I suppose, by creating a feedback loop or a series of feedback loops of the human experience. So you set up so that everyone is interconnected through these computers and can give feedback about whatever they're experiencing, and that, some algorithms that read this data and give feedback themselves are going to govern society and how you manage the resources and stuff like that. But of course, it's, again, going to be a fixed state. It can't grow, it can't change, it can't improve. It's just going to be staying with the, sticking with the carrying capacity that we have, which the World Wildlife Fund would say is 1 billion people. Some say less.
We've all seen the Matrix. We know that doesn't work. Things change.
Of course. Yeah. We all have the power that Neo has. To revolutionize it. So they did this experiment where they put 500, 800 people in a stadium, something like that, and they gave them all paddles. One side is red, one side is green. They put them all on the chair, and they didn't give them any instructions. People sat down and checked out these paddles and said, "What do these do?" And then someone held one up and saw that it correlated to something on the screen on the big screen in front of everyone. So pretty soon they all figured out that these things actually have an effect on what's happening there, and it's sort of a cumulative effect. So there's two sides of the room. One side controls the right side, and the other side controls the left side of the screen. It's actually the game of Pong. This is in the 80s when that was the latest game. So you would like this. Yeah. You had one side of the room versus the other, and red makes the paddle go up, and green makes it go down. So if they want to stop it, they want to defend their goal, they actually we can't have everyone turn it red and go up, because then it'll go too fast and go beyond the thing. So some of the people had to be pulling it down, even though clearly it has to be moving up. So they sort of have this balance that.
But they just figured it out intuitively, or?
Yeah, just somehow some of them knew that you can't have too many people doing that or go too far. So they found this balance where they're actually playing the game and hitting the ball back and forth, being successful at doing this, and they claim that this proved that, this whole computer utopian idea would work, and you don't need leadership, you don't need ideas to govern society. You can just have
cooperation.
You just have a giant game of Pong.
Yeah.
I wish that worked.
It's analogous to it.
All right, everyone, time to vote. Turn on your Pong games.
Pretty much. So it's an information society that they're going towards, but again, it's not developing. So as the universe is changing, you're not going to really evolve with it, and it'll leave you behind if that's the center of your civilization, right? You're going to go extinct.
Don't pause after saying something so depressive.
Well, that's only if we go with their way. I'll tell you about
Quickly, tell me something happy.
how we can avoid extinction towards the end of this. But yeah, they didn't have to think about future generations. If you get this computer thing configured properly, you don't need to worry about anyone else or any other time in the future or any problems that might face us. You can just concentrate on serving your own pleasure, right? You might call it the pursuit of rationalized self-interest, which is an Ayn Rand term.
I think I heard the term for it when I was studying in high school It's called scientific determinism. If you knew the exact direction and impact of every particle in the universe, you could predict what would happen from then on out.
Mm-hmm. This is the determinism, the ideology of determinism, but it doesn't quite work.
It's pretty dumb. We got this figured out. I know where all the particles are going. What? No. Can't. I don't know.
Because there's things that have an effect on matter that does not matter. It doesn't have a.
We're not even seeing. Or we haven't
have a mass or location, and that's ideas.
Well, we can't really tell yet whether like the activities of quantum particles can or can't be predicted.
This is what they thought.
Variation, yeah.
That's just what they thought.
Yeah.
So they assumed that.
Yeah, well, they said that the act of watching it happen changes the outcome.
Yeah.
So, we don't know how exactly that's happening, but there seems to be some effect of the mind that is not accounted for there. So they're trying to build this this world where the carrying capacity of the Earth it is dictated by what resources we have, and those are fixed. And computers should decide how those resources are divvied up, and that leaves all the decision making out of other people's hands, and they can just enjoy themselves, right? And there's actually a much newer project that has come out in the last decade or so. It's become very popular, and it sounds a lot like this. Does anyone know what I'm getting at?
SETI?
No. No. It's the Venus Project, which was popularized in the Zeitgeist films. But yeah, it doesn't have people improving themselves. It's just there for that's the hook. Is people think, oh, if you can just enjoy yourself and leave everything up to the computer. Right? And they're not increasing the means to physically sustain society. Right? It's fixed. I actually interviewed Jacques Fresco myself. I asked him if he thought the carrying capacity, and that's a term that he uses, which is interesting. I'd like to look at the etymology of that term, but he said that I asked him if the carrying capacity is decided by the population, or if the population is decided by the carrying capacity, and he basically said that we have fixed resources, and there's only so many people will be able to save, but we'll do well for those people. Sorry to Africa, I guess. So,
sorry, everybody.
Going back a couple decades, you had this cultural demoralization in the 60s with the coordinated murders of JFK, RFK, MLK, which led into the Vietnam and Cold Wars. And you had, a tragic culture where people didn't see any future because they thought we were all going to be annihilated in a nuclear holocaust. And, they drilled every day for that, hide under your desk. Somehow that'll protect you from the 10,000 bombs. And those three leaders were, these are people that represented posterity, that represented big ideas, a future of peace and prosperity, and building things up, development, right? But those things were crushed, and you're left with a culture of people that they're working towards a future. They don't think there will be one, so all that's left is to just enjoy yourself in the here and now. There's no future to consider. There's no other person. It's just self-interest, and that's the boomers for the most part. So that was sort of the end of the American dream. People are no longer working so that their progeny can have a better existence. They're working for, well, they're not working. Yeah. There's no interest in creating more potential for the next generation, so that the next generation can get ahead and not be in so much debt, or have a better chance to develop themselves, get an education, get a real profession. They figured, if we don't blow ourselves up, then we're going to eat all the resources up, and maybe destroy the environment with some new technology. But one way or the other, there's not really any future to work towards. So this culture kind of made it easy for the Ayn Rand type of ideology to become popular, which it did. And she later took on a protege by the name of Alan Greenspan. Although there may have been a little bit more than that.
Yeah, she called him the Undertaker because he was so cheerful.
Yeah. Cheerful ideology. So in '87, you have Ronald Reagan. He nominates Greenspan as successor to Paul Volcker for chairman of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve. The idea was that computers could be used to virtually eliminate the risk in the markets by using very complex calculations, which basically are hedging, which is like making side bets to balance the risk of investment. This created a very large market of financial instruments, which has continued to grow and is now 20 times the world's product of physical product. What we produce physically is 1/20th of the $1.5 quadrillion of derivatives that are in existence because of this move. And then you had Larry Summers, if anyone wants to look up the Endgame memo, he called the heads of a bunch of banks and worked with them to force derivatives into the World Trade Organization, so now it's a global market, and that's how it was able to get so big. And then they made it law that these things have an equal value to anything else, that whatever it says on the paper is how much it's worth monetarily. So I guess an insurance bet an insurance bet on your house is worth the same as your house, even though it's just a piece of paper. So it's a system that's trying to keep this equilibrium and balance, but it's careful not to grow physically. It just grows monetarily, and they think they pretend that monetary growth is the same as physical growth. But what they really created was a giant casino, which is becoming globalized bit by bit. The chips in this casino are the derivatives, and basically the idea behind them is, I don't know if you guys have ever talked to someone who thought that they had a good system for how to win at a casino. I had a friend that told me that his idea was, okay, I'll start off with a $5 bet. If that loses, I'll bet 10. If that loses, I'll bet 20, right? And,
To make it up.
Yeah, so eventually you're betting your house so that you can end up with a $5 profit at the end of the day, right?
That's called chasing.
Yeah.
Bet the moon.
But if you're able to...
At some point I'm going to win.
But if you're able to continually pump out new financial instruments, and you can keep this thing going indefinitely, and then, they're not making one bet at a time either. It's millions of bets at a time. And you're basically blowing up a huge bubble. They're saying it's making things less risky and more stable, but it's just pushing it off to a later date, consolidating the risk, and making it global, really. And with all this growth of this shadow economy, really, there's no real growth to go along with it. So it's devaluing and endangering the real assets that it's associating itself with. This is why you need Glass-Steagall, because they need to be separated. You can't have all these fraudulent, worthless debts commingled with real assets like pensions and people's bank accounts, farms, and things like that. Because when it becomes known that those are worthless and fraudulent, then when they go down, they take the real economy down with them. And that's when they start asking for a shared sacrifice while wearing $1 million crown, and, telling us that our nation or our city is bankrupt when it's really they who have bankrupted themselves financially and morally, trying to take us down with them or sacrifice us to keep their game going a bit longer. And actually, that's sort of how it works. They just, they know they're bankrupt, but as long as they can create some more bets, and those bets are in action, the horses are still running, right? You're not bankrupt until they finish running. So,
What were the good items besides the farms? Did you say pensions? Or?
Yeah, pensions, bank accounts, social services, infrastructure, power plants, bridges, all that good stuff. So that's the real economy, which needs to be saved and protected against this other stuff, which devalues it. It's called the firewall. So these things become known to be worthless. It's like they're on fire. No one wants to be holding these types of assets, and anyone who does, everything else that they're holding is going to burn down with it. Because once one can't be paid off, then that means the next one can't be paid off.
That was the purpose of the writers of these derivatives, was to see it go down. They had sold short,
Yeah.
so they would make a lot of money as the value of these bundles of mortgages would go lower and lower in value.
Yeah, they create these bubbles and they bet against their own investors because they know better, and
The taxpayers were there in the end to pick it up after the bank would fail.
yeah, they know they can't really lose because they've got the backstop of bleeding us dry to pay for it all. So everything became monetized. Everything needs to be sold to get more chips in the game. So you got to privatize your BC Rail and your water and your resorts and wherever else you've got to get money, because money has become the end-all be-all. It's not about growing or sustaining life. It's just about getting more money. Do you have something?
No. I did both.
So, of course,
Oh, yeah.
everyone knows.
Can I say it?
Yeah, go ahead.
I just remembered when you were commenting a couple of minutes ago that they're trying to convince us now that our dollar, this is a pet peeve of mine, has gone down 10 or 11% from parity. Well, you're too young, but in 1994, and many, many, many years, we were paying 50% conversion rates to the U.S. dollar. And they told us then, this is good, it brings in, this is good, because this way we entice more manufacturing and more development and all that. Well, it never happened, and now they're trying to set us on that slope. I mean, our buying power is down 10% in a period of a couple of weeks, and we don't know what that's going to do.
Well, it's all arbitrary anyways, isn't it? I mean, we didn't actually...
Yeah, that's a good reason to drive your MLA or MP crazy, because I find it just absolutely shocking. And nothing material seems to have transpired in the past year or 2 years in terms of what funds money.
Yeah, well, our concept of value is completely shifted because of this. Things that have real value, they might not have monetary value, and that monetary value might not, vice versa. So these guys, you know, they put the monetary aggregates above all else. That has to be, you know, for corporations or whatever. They basically say, you know, screw the environment, screw our future, screw the people.
Yeah.
We got to improve our bottom line every quarter, right?
Yeah.
And that's actually a major difference between corporations and government in you know, when you're talking about the idea of these institutions is one exists just to bring profit to the shareholders, and that's their main goal, that's their stated goal. But a government should be there to actually, you know, improve the general welfare, be there for human progress, you know, to protect us from imperial threats, things like that. It has a bigger purpose. It's, you know, if the government takes a loss, but, you know, our lives are improved, we get an education, and in the long run, that's going to be a good investment. But monetarily, it doesn't look like it, right?
Yeah, there's no song and dance they can do to convince me of that. with the exchange rate.
Yeah.
Is equilibrium, harmony, and there are a couple of other examples. Are they all the same thing? Is harmony the same as equilibrium?
No.
No.
Equilibrium, well, follow you.
No, they're not.
Thank you.
Harmony is like thirds and sixths and fourths and fifths in music.
Yeah.
There's a resonance, whereas equilibrium is something very different. It's this idea that he's talking about of a balance.
Forced.
Everything balances itself out. That's how things operate.
Yeah.
But it's the intricate differences between the two sides of the equation that makes beauty in what you're listening to, not that they're exactly equal. You know what I mean?
Right. Thanks.
And then the difference you can get, you can grow from that too by comparing them and learning from those differences too, right? Most of you heard the recent report, 85 people control more wealth than the poorest half of the world.
Yes.
I was thinking that even a small fraction of that wealth that the 85 people control, if it wasn't sitting idle in their bank accounts and it was actually being put to use in a productive economy, those 50% could be brought out of poverty, you know.
Yeah.
Well, more than that.
I mean, when you hear
The
when
figures
figures
are-
like $5 billion could interfere in the trade being spent by the U.S. and they're cutting off food for instance.
Yeah, maybe what that could have done for
You know about the military budget of the U.S., right?
$1 trillion a year.
Some stupid like figure like you could feed, clothe, shelter the entire planet for 70 years without even like changing. It's like
Oh, what?
you could feed, clothe, and shelter the entire planet for like 70 years just on what they've spent in 1 year.
Oh,
1 year,
yes. Yeah, I believe it.
just on the military. And
Yes.
of course they prefer to be on military because that has the opposite effect.
Yes,
Creates
I-
destruction, creates instability. Life is on a downturn.
Eisenhower, we made his farewell speech.
Who's sorry?
Eisenhower.
Eisenhower?
He made his farewell speech, and in that, he enumerated like what are the ships and what you could do with the price of one destroyer, with one B-52.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then he gives the total number of these things. It's huge.
Well, I mean, the average bomb is $50,000. Dropping $50,000 bombs on $10 tents. Using $80 million aircraft.
It's $500,000 just for one of the aircraft to take off to do whatever, without counting the cost of the stuff he was going to drop or shoot or whatever.
But the oligarchy depends on a false scarcity and perpetual war for itself to exist. Because if you don't have those two things, you don't have an oligarchy. You can, you foment peace through prosperity, and you have mutually beneficial cooperation between nations, and that that's the basis for a system that doesn't involve any sort of empire. You don't need an empire if you have a world of nation states based on Plato's Republic, where they grow by internal development instead of an imperial system that you have today, which grows by conquest, grows by external means. So that's a main difference in the two systems. And I'm going to read a quote at some point from Henry C. Carey, which I think illustrates it very nicely. It's just coming up, but so you have the IMF doing their loan sharking to vulnerable nations. You know that and the IMF profits greatly by creating a system of debt slavery, where these loans are offered out when nations are at their most vulnerable, and the conditionalities that come with it make sure that they can't be repaid completely. So they're always going to be in debt, and they're not going to be able to develop their way out of these things. They're going to be stuck doing cash cropping, things like cotton and sugar. Single monocrops that is not going to be enough to sustain your population without having to import some of the other things that you need. And usually those even those crops that they're producing themselves are not for them, but they're for export. And when there's a famine, they force the export, which you can see in the potato famines in Ireland, which cut the population in half, or more than that. Yeah. That's a conservative estimate, yeah. And then they have to privatize and monetize all the resources, impose austerity on the people, divert funds from the real economy to the globalist coffers. That's the oligarchical principle. And then they tell us, we need zero growth. That's the way to prevent a Malthusian catastrophe is to above all else restrict growth, and that keeps the false scarcity going artificially. I like to liken it to a boa constrictor, because what does a boa constrictor do? Is it forces you to contract or constrict, and it just tightens the noose. So every time, that's how it would work in a zero growth economy. There's only two options left. If there's zero growth, then there's stasis, and then there's constriction of your economy. So
Who's proposing zero growth?
well, that's the green ideology, right?
The green
You'll
ideology.
see the WWF, and
The economy has to grow with the magnitude of population increase. So that's correct.
but they don't want a population increase. They want a decrease in population, right? And that's the boa constrictor. It's preying on the population, and as it shrinks, it gets happier, it gets closer to its meal, right? So that's the whole thing. Is I'm tying in the green ideology with the monetarism, British monetarism, and the setting up of the derivatives as the central focus of world economies. So what we can do instead is revive the spirit of the American Revolution, bring back the credit system that was founded by Alexander Hamilton in the time around 1776. The system is neither capitalism nor communism, which generally people believe is the dichotomy, but it's a false dichotomy. The real struggle for dominance is between the American system, which is one of internal development and growth, versus the free trade British imperialist system, which is based on conquest. And so, really briefly, Alexander Hamilton, the first Treasury Secretary of the United States, he created the protectionist system of using tariffs to protect the things that are actually important to sustaining a thriving nation, which are agriculture to make sure everyone's fed, manufacturing to add value to the resources, and turn them into something more useful. Instead of just shipping out raw logs and raw oil and things like that, you actually turn them into finished products, upgrade them yourself, and in that way you're creating wealth. You're increasing your means to have a population. And he also put a major focus on technological development. There were grants offered for people who innovated new ideas, and he called it increasing the productive powers of labor. So basically increasing the efficiency of people's labor, which then frees up their time to do things, not necessarily just things that they enjoy, but more specifically things that were creative, things that improve themselves and improve the culture for the next generation. So, 1851, you have Henry C. Carey. He's the chief economic advisor to Abraham Lincoln. And I think he wrote the most powerful quote to date in reference to the American system, which I would like to read because it's one of my favorite quotes. It's a bit lengthy, but if I don't stumble, you'll probably be engaged. So, two systems are before the world. The one looks to increase the proportion of persons and of capital engaged in trade and transportation, and therefore diminishing the proportion engaged in producing commodities with which to trade, with necessarily diminished return to the labor of all, while the other looks to increase the proportion engaged in the work of production and diminishing that engaged in trade and transportation with increased return to all, giving the laborer good wages and to the owner of capital good profits. One looks to increase the quantity of raw materials to be exported and diminishing the inducements to the import of men, thus impoverishing both farmer and planter by throwing on them the burden of freight, while the other looks to increasing the import of men and diminishing the export of raw materials, thereby enriching both planter and farmer by relieving them from the payment of freight. One looks to compelling the farmers and planters of the Union to continue their contributions for the support of the fleets and armies, the paupers, the nobles, the sovereigns of Europe. The other, enabling ourselves to apply the same means to the moral and intellectual improvements of sovereigns of America. One looks to the continuance of that bastard freedom of trade which denies the principle of protection, yet doles it out as revenue duties. The other, extending the area of legitimate free trade by the establishment of perfect protection, followed by the annexation of individuals and communities, and ultimately by the abolition of custom houses. One looks to exporting men to occupy desert tracts. Sound familiar? The sovereignty of which is obtained by aid of diplomacy of war or war. The other to increasing the value of an immense extent of vacant land by importing men by the millions for their occupation. One looks to increasing the necessity for commerce, the other to increasing the power to maintain it. I'm not sure if this word is a misquote. One looks to the underworking of the Hindu and sinking the rest of the world to his level, the other to raising the standard of man throughout the world to our level. One looks to paupers and ignorance, depopulation and barbarism, the other in increasing wealth, comfort, intelligence, combination of action and civilization. One looks towards universal war, the other towards universal peace. One is the English system, and the other we can be proud to call the American system. For it is the only one ever devised, the tendency of which was that of elevating while equalizing the condition of man throughout the world. Such is the true mission of the people of these United States. To raise the value of labor throughout the world, we need only to raise the value of our own. To improve the political condition of man throughout the world, it is that we ourselves should remain at peace, avoid taxation for maintenance of fleets and armies, and become rich and prosperous. To diffuse intelligence and to promote the cause of morality throughout the world, we are required only to pursue the course that shall diffuse education throughout the world and shall enable every man more readily to acquire property, and with it respect for the rights of property. To substitute true Christianity for the detestable system known as the Malthusian, it is needed that we prove to the world that it is population that makes the food come from rich soils, and food tends to increase more rapidly than population, thus vindicating the policy of God to man. So, the credit system in question was modeled on the Massachusetts Bay Colony system, and the system that made credit available to anyone that was willing and able to turn an idea into reality, so long as it was a productive enterprise.
Pretty soon, man. Yeah, not much longer.
So, for instance, if you had a poor farmer and you also had a need for food in the society, you can extend federal credit to them at 0 to 1% interest, get them farming, whereas otherwise you have idle money and idle people. It doesn't make sense, right? Or if it's not idle money, it's newly created credit, but the credit can be justified by the increase in wealth, which gives it values, which means it's not inflationary. So in this kind of a system, it's not geared towards keeping the rich rich, but the poor can, if they have good ideas and good work ethic, they can elevate their state and improve their plight. So this creates a society that's focused on scientific and intellectual progress and the general welfare. And so what we need to do is create a revolution in the hearts and minds of the policymakers to change government from existing solely to exploit its people to benefit the few. Instead, it can exist to for the general welfare and for the development of the minds, the culture, the science, and all that. I got a short quote from Alexander Hamilton himself. This is my favorite of his. A fundamental maxim in the system of public credit of the United States is that the creation of debt should always be accompanied by the means of its extinguishment. So, whatever you create the credit for is not arbitrary. It's not so you can go get a TV or something. It's actually specifically for the purpose of increasing the amount of wealth that there is in existence, right? Bringing into existence new wealth.
I don't quite follow that. You said it's not important, but the money is important?
Well, it's not money. We're not talking about monetarism. It's credit, because they're not just giving it out and saying go do whatever you want with it. They're saying we're creating this for the specific purpose of you going and building that bridge, or going and starting a farm, right? And it's fraud if you don't. And the credit will be canceled. These are bills of credit.
It's very conditional loan, essentially.
They're not universal bill, dollar bills that they can just go and spend it somewhere else. It has to be for that.
But there would still be credit that would be in circulation for the purposes of regular commerce, right?
Sure. And if you want to use it for speculation, you can get a loan for that, but it's not going to be at zero interest. It's going to be you're going to pay interest on that, and that interest instead of going into a billionaire's pocket is recirculated into the economy, right? And
It's not the loss won't be to the system itself. At the end of
yeah, well, it'll be a gain. There will be a gain in one way, and hopefully it's not too damaging for speculation is not too damaging.
You raised an important point, because what would happen if somebody were buying a house and they were given the $100,000 to make the purchase, but they decided that they're going to use it now for speculation in the market, and not actually for the house. That was just a come on to qualify for a loan.
Exactly.
Do the bankers have any recourse against someone like that?
If it's a bill of credit,
Yeah.
then it said right on it what it was for.
In today's world, without that system in place, what protection have the banks got if somebody falsifies the purpose of their loan?
Well, fraud is fraud. I'm not
Would
sure.
that be a fraud?
That's a good question. That's actually an issue.
There's ways around it. You can always engage in some other form of fraud where you use that. Well, it's kind of like being given a McDonald's coupon. You say, okay, you can go and use this for specifically buying a McDonald's burger, but there's nothing stopping you from going and selling that coupon to someone and turning it into some other form of credit or
I'm just
monetary value that you
thinking
can.
of theft.
Yeah.
If you don't buy the house and you disappear, how are they going to
First of
find you?
all, hold on. A bank isn't going to give you the loan unless they have the house as security.
Okay, that's what I'm looking for.
No.
I'm just wondering.
No, they're just not going to do that. No bank is going to give you anything unless
Sure.
there's something to secure it.
And what you've been seeing a lot of recently, I think they just had to make a law about this, was people getting cash back with their housing purchase.
Right.
And then they go do whatever with that, and then they wind up broke because it wasn't, very fiscally prudent move when they bought the sports car with their extra money and then can't afford the bill. But yeah, like Paul was saying, with the securitization in a monetary system, your assets are what securitizes the loan. And if you don't pay it back, you get the money to do with whatever you want. Go buy a TV, but if you don't pay the loan back, you lose your house, right? In a credit system, that's not how it works. You don't have to be wealthy in the first place to get the loan. The loan is based on what's going to happen in the future, right? It's future motivated activity, and if you don't follow through, if you're not successful on what they invested in you to do, you just don't have that farm, right? And so you're just where you were before, and but there's very little reason not to, right? Because you can't go and spend it at the casino. No, it was a bill of credit for this, and then these bills can still be recirculated, but it's again set up so that they can be recirculated, but only in productive measures. So, the farmer who received a bill of credit for their farm, they might pass that bill of credit on to someone who sells them fertilizer, and that would still.
That's what?
That still works. You can still do that.
Works. Yeah.
But you just can't pass it on to a car dealership. Unless you need it.
Unless you, yeah.
maybe the tractor dealership. Yeah.
Yeah, I went to Lamborghini to buy a tractor. They sell tractors.
They were making a fool of it.
So yeah, it makes much more sense to actually turn that bill of credit into what it was intended for, because then you can go from having virtually nothing to having a farm that produces an income and food to sustain you, starting from scratch, starting from having nothing. Now the loan is repaid to the bank, and now you have a farm that's producing, right? And then that credit goes and gets recirculated. And in that way, I have found that credit that you can make the analogy that water is like the credit of an ecosystem, because you can have the idea of turning a desert into a rainforest, but you need the water to come in. But if you have too much, it's a flood. If you have too little, it's a drought. And that's why dams are like the banks of an ecosystem, right? They control how much
Well, liquid water has been defined by the astronomers as the only material in the universe that can support life anywhere on any planet. If they don't have liquid water, life won't exist.
Yeah, and they're very, very convinced that there's been water on, warm, flowing water on Mars. So that's
Yes.
So, but the one thing about my analogy is it's a little bit off because a dam is kind of like a monetarist bank because it doesn't orchestrate what happens to the water. It doesn't say maybe the dam operator can control where it winds up, but or whoever's building the canals. But and that is a big difference between a monetary bank and a credit offering bank or banking system is that in a credit system that the person who's running who's the president of the like a Nicholas Biddle or an Alexander Hamilton, these are geniuses that are like composers, right? They're composing the economy. Sure. It's a planned economy. Right. Whereas, a Ben Bernanke is just an animal who's reacting to market forces and market situations.
He's finished now, apparently.
I hope so.
His replacement is about here now.
Yeah, well, he's done enough, so I'm sure he needs to rest. But yeah, you have sort of. All these guys do in a monetarist economy is they react to a market situation by decreasing the interest rate, and it's a very passive, reactionary. They don't really get involved in what's happening in the economy. It's not planned, so anything could happen based on who's got all the chips. I guess is really who decides in that scenario, right? So this kind of system works best on a national scale. If it's a national policy that they make good on these debts, then the debts actually become highly valuable. If the U.S. government owes you money, and they're actually running a system, a credit system, then that debt is gold. It's gold, right? It's going to increase in value just based on the production that it's enabling, even beyond the interest that it bears. It's very valuable. You know it's going to be made good on. You don't have to worry about that. And there's no bank run scenario like this is a system that it goes against those who say that you need a very strict reserve capital requirement, so you can actually recirculate most of the credit that's in their holdings, so they don't have a lot of reserve holdings because it's being lent out for specific purposes. It's not we're just going to let it out there and hope it comes back.
Sort of becomes self-sustaining.
Yeah, it's being invested into specific enterprises that are not going to fail due to lack of funds because the federal government can create more funds. So if there's the will to make those things happen and have this progress and increase of wealth, it's going to happen and it's going to be made good on and it's going to continue to work.
And of course, they've done away largely with reserves now anyway.
Yeah, there's no reserve requirements. There should be a reserve requirement, a very strict one in a monetarist system because they're just taking our money and gambling with it. But it doesn't need to be so strict in a credit system. So get close to the end here. So you could say it's a Promethean versus Zeusian system as well. One is sort of in the here and now, and one is connecting the past to the future, and with us as the conduit to that. It's actually considering the future and how to deal with that. want to cut through metal, are you going to do it with a laser beam, or are you going to put it on the beach and hope that the waves from the ocean eventually,
Not even something as crude as a hacksaw.
No, that's focused concentrated energy. That's not wind. So a green economy does not look anything like an American system economy. Really quickly, I wanted to make this connection because I think it's really important. Can someone grab me a glass of water? Cups. So as I mentioned before,
take a chance on this. My germs are not your germs.
All right.
I can get you some more water.
It's okay.
Oh, you got it.
Okay. That was enough, thanks. So,
I'll lend you this water, but I'll just...
yeah. Okay, back again, yes. So there was this turning point in the 60s of the assassination of JFK and his brother, and it's been uncovered that was orchestrated through a company called Permidex, based in Montreal. 51% owner of that is a man named Louis Mortimer Bloomfield, who Mr. Garrison, what was his name? William Garrison. William Garrison wrote in his book that was sort of the where everything sort of led to in his investigations, but they weren't able to. Well, they were stopped from getting the true culprits put on the stand. But this network that's connected through Permidex is also very tightly connected to the World Wildlife Fund. And in France, actually, there were 13 attempts on Charles de Gaulle's life, and Permidex is not welcome in France and a couple other European nations because they were, well, maybe 13 were connected to Permidex. So France and a couple other European nations have banned Permidex because of their connections to these assassination rings, or whatever you call them, and the fact that they don't really do anything else of significance. They just appear to be a front organization for channeling money. And this is significant to me because if you connect the dots, you can connect. Bloomfield is a founding member of the 1001 Club, which is mainly, its main purpose is to fund the World Wildlife Fund, which has stated that the world's carrying capacity is 1 billion. We need zero growth. We need to deindustrialize. Sovereign nations have to go. We need, a global institution to impose these measures to save the earth from the cancerous scourge of mankind. And other founding members who each paid $10,000 to be such, founding members of the 1001 Club were Conrad Black. I'm not sure of Paul Desmarais himself, but Power Corp and others connected to him were among those. And then you have, I'm trying to connect Bertrand Russell into that. I don't know if anyone has heard of him being like a former World Wildlife Fund member or something like that. But you have, so the World Wildlife Fund was founded by Julian Huxley, someone with the last name Rockefeller, His Royal Highness Prince Philip, Bernhard, the card-carrying Nazi himself,
Rothschild, Satan, Hitler,
pretty much. The usual suspects.
This is pretty clean there.
Maurice Strong.
Thank you. That was another one that I would have.
When was the
Maurice Strong? Yeah.
When was the World Wildlife Fund created?
When?
Yeah.
I think it was
50s. That's 61, I think.
61.
Yeah, this was one of the earliest of the green movements, but you had the Sierra Club and CES before that. But World Wildlife Fund now is the leading environmental movement. So they have on their own. Club of Rome, yeah, that's it's not as it's definitely one of the major players, but I'm not sure it's quite as publicly like I think. I don't know enough about them.
Well, the Club of Rome is more
behind the scenes.
oriented to just the issue of population, without going. But it is part of it.
Yeah, but they don't have like commercials trying to appeal to.
Yeah, right. No, they're not an organ. They're not going out to the population.
Yeah.
They're like Bilderberg.
They're an elite. They're a club of elite top people. You know.
So right now the Bank of Canada has a provision. You know, we do have a Bank of Canada, and it says in the Bank of Canada Act that in some cases 1/3, in some cases 1/4 of the revenue should be repaid. It's basically a capital reserve requirement that is very restrictive, so you can't recirculate as much of the credit as would be necessary to do something like build Nawapa and build dams and canals that are 10 times the biggest things you've seen in the world so far. So that would have to be changed so that we could be building up in a way that's it's growing as fast as the universe is changing. You can't just double your energy supply. You need to grow by scales of magnitudes in how dense and quantitative your energy is. So I could do the bail-in. You guys want to talk about the bail-in for 5 or 10 minutes? Or should we, do we have time to go there? Yeah? Okay. That's the only other thing I have except for a quote from Lincoln about the National Bank Act, repealing that. Should we go into the bail-in?
Is it connected to what you're saying?
It lives out. It's not necessary.
Okay.
Oh.
I wish it could lift out.
All right.
I wish it could lift out, but I can't. Really quickly, yeah. So there's now that the bailouts are less and less popular. They're setting up Canada, the EU, the Commonwealth, and the U.S. as bail-in regimes. Basically, the globally significant, too big to fail, too big to jail banks would be saved by taking the unsecured deposits from depositors and converting them into bank stock, which of course would be worthless if the bank was ever in such a state that they needed to steal your deposits. So when they did it in Cyprus recently, people got $2 bank shares. They got, some of them 80%, some of them 20 or 40% of their deposits were converted into bank shares or just outright taken. And $2 bank shares became worth 1 cent. And with no hope of increasing in value because who's going to invest in a bank that's obviously bankrupt? So that's the new plan to basically loot the population to save the gambling debts of Wall Street and their global counterparts. Canada has it in its 2013 budget that they released. It has the words bail-in regime right in there. The European Union, some of the people who govern that, some of the top officials there have said that the Cyprus template is the model for the EU. They're going to implement that. in the U.S., the Dodd-Frank bill, I think it's 30,000 or 50,000 page bill that they're still writing, even though it's been passed. They're still writing more pages to it. The second installment of that had the Title II orderly liquidation authority, which basically puts the derivatives and all this junk as the top priority for what gets saved in the bankruptcy proceedings. And then, people's deposits are lower than that. So that's how they're going to play that out as these things, the globally significant, no, it's the ones that are considered too good to fail. JP Morgan Chase, Goldman Sachs, Citibank.
There's 20 global banks.
There's 20 global cities. HSBC probably one.
Right, and there's some U.S., some HSBC.
Royal Bank?
RBC.
Royal Bank of Scotland.
Royal Bank.
Royal Bank.
Well, the Royal Bank of Scotland. Royal Bank of Scotland.
Well, that's Elizabeth Bank.
I'm not sure if any Canadian ones are on that list.
Well, HSBC is big in Canada.
Yeah, I think it's the London-based one. That's
Right.
So that's one of the things that struck me when I come back from California. Everywhere I went, I was seeing these red and white HSBC.
Avoid HSBC.
Pimples on an envelope.
Are not the RBC and Royal Bank of Scotland not related?
Oh, I'm sure they're related, but
Like closely, as in pretty much operating under different names. Because, which is actually really, it's a Dutch bank, right?
yeah, well, I certainly wouldn't mean
Because the Royal Bank of Canada is a Dutch bank. Originally.
It's a Dutch bank.
Yeah. That's the first thing I ever read about it.
I certainly wouldn't want anyone to come away with the impression that Canada is immune to any of this, or
Oh, yeah, definitely not.
that our banks are not engaging in this suicidal speculation.
You're saying just 3 European Union, Canada,
The Commonwealth, so Australia,
or
as well as the U.S. They're all Balin regimes now. So, that's that. And then the last thing I wanted to do was this quote from Lincoln. He's trying to save the National Bank. December 26, 1839. He's fighting Van Buren, who was a protege and lawyer of Andrew Jackson, on this issue. And this is his response. Of the sub-treasury then, as contrasted with the national bank. For the before enumerated purposes, I lay down the following propositions to wit. First, it will injuriously affect the community by its operation on the circulating medium. 2, it will be a more expensive fiscal agent. 3, it will be a less secure depository of the public money. To show the truth of the first proposition, let us take a short review of our condition under the operation of a national bank. It was the depository of the public revenues. Between the collection of those revenues and the disbursements of them by the government, the bank was permitted to and did actually loan them out to individuals, and hence the large amount of money annually collected for revenue purposes, which by any other plan would have been idle a great portion of the time, was kept almost constantly in circulation. Any person who will reflect that money is only valuable while in circulation will readily perceive that any device which will keep the government revenues in constant circulation instead of being locked up in idleness is no inconsiderable advantage. By the sub-treasury, the revenue is to be collected and kept in iron boxes until the government wants it for disbursement, thus robbing the people of the use of it, while the government does not itself need it, and while the money is performing no nobler office than that of rusting in iron boxes. The natural effect of this change of policy, everyone will see, is to reduce the quantity of the money in circulation. And later, in this quote, he says, the amount of paper in circulation that the 40 million would serve as a basis to is withdrawn, which would be in a sound state at least 100 million. When 100 million or more of the circulation we have now shall be withdrawn, who can contemplate without terror the distress, ruin, bankruptcy, and vagary that must follow? Almost ending. The man who has purchased any article, say a horse, on credit at $100, when there are 200 million circulating in the country, if the quantity be reduced to 100 million by the arrival of payday, will find the horse but sufficient to pay half the debt, and the other half must either be paid out of his other means and thereby become a clear loss to him, or go unpaid and thereby become a clear loss. What I have here said of a single case of the purchase of a horse will hold good in every case of a debt existing at the time a reduction in the quantity of money occurs, by whomsoever and whatsoever and for whatsoever it may have been contracted. It may be said that what the debtor loses, the creditor gains by his operation, but on examination this will be found true only to a very limited extent. It is more generally true that all lose by it. The creditor by losing more of his debts than he gains by the increased value of those he collects. The debtor by either parting with more of his property to pay his debts than he received in contracting, or by entirely breaking up in his business and thereby being thrown upon the world in idleness. Okay.
Very nice quote. Okay. That's it. Thank you.